Your Honor, these are case numbers 2024 GS 23-2194, 5425A, 5413, 5412. As to the charge of murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. As to the charge of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. As to the charge of burglary first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. As to the charge of harassment first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of harassment second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. As to the charge of conspiracy to commit harassment first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of conspiracy to commit harassment second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Signed by our foreperson. Ladies and gentlemen, if this is a verdict you reached in your deliberation room and this is still your verdict now, please raise your right hand.
I will apologize in advance. I didn't expect to actually reach this point today. This is my second victim statement in 24 hours. Yesterday was reliving the two worst days of my life, between hearing the step-by-step account of my sister's murder, Mr. Mello's 2 new charges, his bond hearing, and my niece being put into emergency protective care again. So I am exhausted, and I'm going to do my best to express myself appropriately. So with Your Honor's leniency, just give me a bit of grace. My understanding is this conversation is with you. This isn't with the defendant. This is not with counsel. This is not with the gallery. So this is a conversation with you. And I've had 3 years to try to articulate how this has impacted me, and I still have yet to find the words, and it won't happen tonight either. So I've decided instead to talk about what logically should be taken into consideration for any sentencing, which is remorse, rehabilitation, and recidivism. This defendant sat on that stand with full disregard for the authority of the law when it came to his actions outside of this courtroom, in blatant disregard for the authority of law inside this courtroom. He recounted step by step in excruciating detail everything he did. And if I may paraphrase the defense counsel's closing statement, did he cry? Did he shake? Did he look visibly distressed? He said the word repulsed, but did he once look repulsed? He said the word vomited. Did he ever once look nauseated as he described dragging my sister through my living room? Cold doesn't begin to describe the lack of emotion. And if I may be blunt, if we're going to argue somebody has to have malice and hate in their heart to be capable of murder, then one could also argue that anyone medically diagnosed as antisocial personality disorder is therefore not capable of committing murder. I think that is a logical fallacy, is asinine, and the fact that I'm tired, I will no longer go down that, but there has been no remorse once shown by this defendant in this courtroom. Without remorse, you cannot have rehabilitation. Rehabilitation requires acknowledgement that I have done a wrong, I have a debt to pay, and I can improve to become a better member of society. It begins with remorse. Without remorse, there is no rehabilitation. Without remorse, without rehabilitation, you have recidivism. This man, no, I'm sorry, this defendant wanted to kill someone. He joined the Marines, specifically the infantry. He wanted to kill someone. He was given a target on a silver platter. He was given an address, a date, a time, and he planned it. Because he knew that if he planned it just enough, he would never get caught. He planned it so much that he thought, well, even when I got caught, I got this. I can still get out of this. Without remorse, without rehabilitation, any person that goes through that effort to commit a murder would absolutely do it again to see if they could. You're left with either two options. Either he is a weak, easily manipulated man who would kill anybody that anyone asked him to, or he's not. A weak and easily manipulated man. And if that's the case, then he absolutely would do this again to see if he's smart enough this time, to see if he can beat it this time, because he has shown no respect for the law of this courtroom. The only thing that I will say about this situation overall is that all of these men did nothing but use my sister. John Mello used her to create a whole new family when he had a wife and children already. Brad Post used her. This defendant used her. All of them used her for their own twisted personal gratification. He would do it again. Without remorse, without rehabilitation, you will have recidivism. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else from the state? Okay. Defense.
Your Honor, may it please the court, Your Honor's presided over this trial. Your Honor is aware of the evidence that was presented at the trial. Your Honor is also aware of the evidence that was proffered. We do believe that could go to mitigation, so we would ask Your Honor to consider that very carefully. Zachary has no prior criminal history, and he stands ready for sentencing. Your Honor, I would ask for Mr. David Hughes, Zach's father, to have the opportunity to address the court briefly.
Yes, sir. Just stand right there.
Thank you, Your Honor, for the opportunity to speak a few words on my son's behalf. The trial is over. A verdict's been rendered, and we accept that. What I want to speak to, because I understand this is the sentencing phase of the trial, where you have some parameter of your sentence. My son is probably, in my lifetime, and I've run into some pretty amazing people, and this is going to be seen as a bias from the father, but he has got such a strong moral compass and fortitude and desire for the truth in his life than really anyone I've ever met. He actually eclipses a lot of those things that I aspire to myself. It's what makes his music so incredibly meaningful, because as a musician, and there are some world-class musicians sitting here today, colleagues of Zach's, what makes a musician's art come through is what's the essence of who they are. It's not something you can fake. When you hear it, you know it's a fake. When you hear music that causes people in a room to weep, you know it's coming from something inside that person that you cannot describe. Zach was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. I want to tell you that. I taught all my children, Zach being the oldest, the value of hard work. He might have been the only person at Juilliard to show up without manicured fingernails and calluses instead. He worked hard. I pushed him hard. Fathers and parents tend to do that with their firstborn child. And maybe I pushed him, a little hard at times, but it made him the man he is today. I want to address something, and Mr. Wilkins,
Just address the moment, David. I'm sorry, just address the moment.
that Zach is a cold-blooded killer. I am sorry. Zach wrote his mother and I a letter delivered to us through his attorneys approximately a month ago. In that letter, he described basically what he did in that chair over there, only in a little more detail. Why he did what he had to do, what he felt he had to do. You heard him say in that chair, he wasn't going to go on a cruise ship to Bora Bora, where he was headed, and look at himself in the mirror at night after playing beautiful classical music for rich people. He couldn't do that. Zach has been brutally honest in his life. So much, sometimes to the detriment of his own career. Everybody in the piano world wants to be a soloist with an orchestra. But it's a very small amount of room on the head of that pin, and that's where he was headed. But he had people in his life, donors, rich benefactors, who made demands of him artistically in exchange for their financial benefit, and he walked away from it to the detriment of his own career. Why do I bring that up? He has such a strong moral compass and a desire for the truth that sometimes he actually hurts himself. His friends here, all these people in this courtroom for the last 2 weeks have been here day in, day out, some as far as from Seattle, Washington. They're here because they grew up with Zach in the music world, and they saw something in him they didn't see in anybody else. He has got a loyal circle of friends that I never had. I told my kids when they grew up, if you, at the end of your life, you end up with 2 or 3 people in your hand that are really there for you, that's the guy I want in the foxhole with me. Consider yourself lucky. Zach's got a dozen of those. Why? Lutina, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm not supposed to mention her name. I'm sorry. But I want you to know, Zach had felt compelled to do what he did because of what he would quote Edmund Burke on this. The only thing necessary for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing. Okay. His desire for the truth and his truthful telling of what happened. I mean, he sat there and he didn't hold anything back that would benefit his portrayal to this court. He's just as brutally honest with himself as he is with other people. He has no criminal record whatsoever before this event. The only thing I know of is an outstanding traffic ticket in Italy somehow he rang up when he was there with Mello. And several of the guards in the detention center, he's been for 3 years, he's been an exemplary inmate have told him that they were going to come to this trial to support him. When you gain the silent respect of law enforcement officers, they see something in you, they see it all. And they see a guy that's respectful for 3 years without a single incident. I think that counts for something. So I'm just here, I'll wrap it up. As you determine your sentencing, I would ask you to consider what type of man he is. And take that into consideration. I love my son. I'm proud of my son. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything else from the state?
No, Your Honor. Your Honor, just for the purpose of the record, I don't, would Your Honor want to inquire of Zach as to whether or not he wishes to speak?
That is up to you. Sorry, I thought that you had indicated that he did.
Your Honor, he does not wish to speak. I just want to put that on record.
Okay. Zachary David Hughes, indictment 2022 GS 2302194, indictment for murder. You're to be committed to the State Department of Corrections for life. Indictment 2022 GS 2302194. You're to be committed to the South Carolina Department of Corrections for 5 years. That is to run concurrent. Indictment 2024 GS 2305425A for burglary first degree to run concurrent is for you to be committed to the South Carolina Department of Corrections for life. The other two indictments, 2024 GS 2305413 for conspiracy to commit harassment second degree is 30 days time served. Indictment 2024 GS 2305412, harassment second degree, 30 days time served. Be dismissed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Our statement's going to be very brief, and that is the jury reached a verdict. The judge sentenced Mr. Hughes, and we're going to appeal. And that's our comment. Thank you very much.
How's everybody this afternoon?
Good.
Good, good.
So what did you think about that verdict?
You know, it's been a long, hard fought 2 weeks. A lot of fights in the courtroom, a lot of battles in the courtroom. I'm very tired. But really, this case is about Christina Parcell. She was brutally murdered by Zach Hughes, and we proved it. And this was a very emotional trial because you rarely have a defendant get on the stand and detail such a heinous crime on a justification that makes no sense. And that was very emotional for us, very emotional for the jurors, very emotional for the courtroom. And we're just glad that this jury did what they did. And they got some sort of justice for Christina and her family, especially her sister, Tina Parcell, who's been through so much. And Tina said it so well. She said it better than anybody could in the courtroom about the impact this has had on her and her life and what he did to her sister. So we hope that this gives them some solace, some justice, a sense of healing in which they can move on. But there's no winners today. Everybody lost something in that courtroom today. And that's very sad. However, my duty is to make sure that this county is safe, that the people are safe from people that commit crimes like Zach Hughes. And today we accomplished that.
Well, the defense also just made a statement that saying they're going to appeal this case, as has been read into the record several times. There was a lot of proffers, a lot of testimony without the jury in place. Do you believe that appeal will move forward?
You know, after 2 weeks of trial, I'm sure there are some appealable issues. But I'll tell you this, the judge did an excellent job analyzing the law. We were very deep in analyzing the law. My co-counsel, Jake Hallforth, did a fantastic job digging in and analyzing complex legal issues all along the way. The defense attorneys did an excellent job protecting the record. And so everything is protected. Everything is going to be ready for the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court to review. And of course, we will take whatever analysis they take. But I feel that the prosecution put together a very strong, clean, legally clean case.
You know, Walt, they say that trials are a search for the truth. Do you think the jury got that today or during this trial?
I think so. I think they got it in a very emotional way. And I think I think it was very difficult for them to listen to the kind of testimony that they had. To listen to my closing statement was hard. To listen to the violence, the deprivation that Christina Parcell suffered was very hard. And there's a lot of other avenues involved in this trial. But for this trial, it was about Zach Hughes murdering Christina Parcell. That's what the trial was about the entire time. And that's what we kept this trial to. And that was the jury's decision to determine whether Zach Hughes, with malice aforethought, killed Christina Parcell. And they found that he did.
But do you think that the verdict would have been any different had they heard about the child porn and the charges that Bradley Post was facing?
I don't think they will ever hear about that because of the relevance of any of that. And as you heard Tina Parcell described, John Mello has done so much to Christina Parcell. Brad Hughes has done so much to Christina Parcell. And Zach Hughes did the ultimate thing to Christina Parcell.
Now, the defense mentioned a couple of times they didn't believe enough evidence was presented by you guys in the case. What were your thoughts when they kept saying that?
You know, that's what they're supposed to say. They got to represent their client. They got to zealously represent their client. They had a very difficult defense to pursue, and it was sort of a novel defense based on the exclusion of a lot of evidence. And I believe they did the best they could.
And while you said in your closing statement that you yourself didn't expect Zach Hughes to take the stand in the way he did, talk us through what was going through your mind as a solicitor. Take us through that process as you hear Zach explaining what detail, step by step, what he did that day.
The only time I've had a person explain a violent murder was in one of the first trials that I had, and that person admitted to it, pled guilty to it, and then described what her co-defendant was doing. And it was hard and it was gruesome. But I've never had a defendant get on the stand with the kind of attitude, ego, cold-faced sternness, and explain a brutally murder in the way that he did. It shook me a little bit, his testimony, I'm not gonna lie. My legal mind was analyzing everything, what he was saying and what he was doing. So the professional side of me was in a little bit of shock as well, because it didn't make a lot of sense to me, because he was giving the prosecution so much to work with. It's my understanding, based on what he said, he was giving me the truth that was in his head at the time.
But you could have crossed him for as long as you wanted to.
Certainly.
But you only asked him one question.
Certainly.
And why did you ask him that question?
That was a strategic decision, a very much strategic decision. And as you know, he couldn't follow the rules inside the courtroom. And so he wasn't going to follow the rules with me either. And he wanted to have a moment of conversation with me. There was no doubt about it. And I felt that he wanted to say what he wanted to say. And if it meant potentially getting convicted, he was willing to do that. And if that was the exchange for me not being able to cross-examine him, because I had a lot of cross-examination, we could have gone on for days, cross-examinations that I wanted to ask him. But that was not my goal. My goal was not to go face-to-face with Zach Hughes. That's not my job. My job is to sustain convictions, keep the people of Greenville County safe, and protect victims, and get them some justice. And so I made a strategic decision to do just that.
During sentencing, we heard some pretty emotional statements from the sister of Christina Parcell and also from the father of Zachary Hughes. Can you describe your emotions as you heard those statements being spoken in the courtroom?
I thought Tina Parcell did a fantastic job explaining the impact that this has had on her life. It has been a major impact to her. I think we forget about her niece, who has been very impacted by all of this stuff. I think she's now 12 or 13 years old, so she suffered a lot in her very young age. And I'm not going to comment on the comments made by Zach Hughes' father.
What about Mr. Mello now? Do you need Zach Hughes to prosecute Mr. Mello?
Well, I have his testimony, so I already have Zach Hughes. He has already stated under oath certain things that Mr. Mello did in relation to the murder of Christina Parcell. And so Mr. Mello has been charged with solicitation of a felony and accessory before the fact of murder. And we will be continuing to build that case and start preparing it for trial.
There was a lot of objections going on during the trial, trying to just keep it towards the judge's ruling. What was it like for the prosecutors to just kind of keep the ball rolling during the trial?
Certainly. The judge makes rulings. The judge decides what can and can't be heard by a jury, because his role is to find or to have a fair trial. And that is what his role is, and that's what he did. And so he has to make legal rulings that are sometimes difficult, and the defense and the prosecution have to adhere to those rulings. Those are the rules that I live under in that courtroom. But we also have to monitor each other and make sure when they violate those rules, or they attempt to violate those rules, or might go violate those rules, then we have to object, and they get to object too, and then the judge has to make those rulings, and we went along. When there's a lot of objections going on, it oftentimes makes it difficult, keep you off your feet a little bit, but that's just part of the way the courtroom works, and that's what we're trained to do.
So what would you say to somebody that, or people that might be thinking that you kind of hit the ball a little bit?
Oh, we didn't have the ball at all. There's no hiding the ball. if you want to talk about excluded evidence, it was excluded for a reason. And there was a really good reason to exclude that because it had nothing to do with this trial. Now, the defendant may have wanted it to be something in this trial, but it had no business in this trial because it was not related to this trial. And that's what the judge ruled, that it was not relevant. And they don't know what that evidence is, and they don't know the full story of all of that evidence. Now, as you all very know, Brad Post has been charged with a multitude of crimes, and he's being prosecuted by the Attorney General's office, and they will continue to prosecute Brad Post for those crimes.
Do you believe if that was introduced and his outbursts, do you believe that that testimony could be used against Brad Post if that had been entered into testimony today?
The information about Brad Post?
Yes, the information about the child porn and the alleged sexual abuse.
And I can't answer that question because it was not introduced in this trial. And those are crimes that Brad Post is going to have to stand for.
So why aren't you prosecuting Brad Post?
The Attorney General's office typically prosecutes around the state child pornography cases. And those are the kind of crimes that Brad Post has been charged with. And so they prosecute those in South Carolina, those in Greenville all the time. In addition, I was prosecuting Zach Hughes, so it just made it easier that he was prosecuting Brad Post. They're two totally separate cases.
So part of the reason that Zach Hughes said that he murdered Christina was he attempted to get investigators to look into her case. Do you feel the system failed in some way, and that's why we're here?
Absolutely not. There were multiple investigations into these families, and there are lots of other ways in which to report alleged crimes, to try to do things in an effort to protect children. But I know one way that you're not supposed to do it, and that's to break into their house and stab them 35 times. And so the sort of sense of vigilante justice that Zach Hughes discussed on the stand just isn't allowed in South Carolina or the country. And we're not going to stand for it here. And if you engage in that, we're going to prosecute you to the full extent of the law.
Mr. Wilkins, Lutina said last night that Christina always thought this may happen to her. Is there anything that the Solicitor's Office or Greenville County Sheriff's Office could have done maybe to have prevented this from happening to Christina Parcell?
Not that I'm aware. You heard the premeditation involved in this particular murder. Without prior knowledge of it, they were very scared of John Mello, and they've said that, but they didn't know Zach Hughes existed. They believed that John Mello was in Italy, and he was, but they didn't know he had a co-conspirator here lying in waiting. I'm not sure how you defend against that.
Is there anything that you wanted to say that we didn't ask you?
You always ask me that question. It's a hard question to answer, other that I think the justice system worked today. I think trials are supposed to be hard and long. The state is supposed to be challenged by the defense, and then you proceed forward, and then the result is what the result is. And I think the right result was done today, and we're satisfied with it.
I do have one more question. We heard on the stand that basically we're looking at all of the images, and at some point there were so many they stopped looking. Will your office continue to look and identify victims in these images?
That has already been done by the Crimes Against Children unit at the Sheriff's Department. They always continue to do that, and that is directly related to Brad Post's case.
And well, is your office going to be involved at all in the daughter's well-being from this point forward?
Sure. So our office doesn't have anything to do with that. That'll be Department of Social Services, Family Court. I believe Tina Parcell mentioned that they've already got hearings and those types of things scheduled. But fortunately for me, that is outside the scope of my authority and my realm, and I'm just fine about that.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.